Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas visiting with Suzanne Lewis Johnson from Rahab. She is the new executive director there. Good morning.
Good morning.
Suzanne, I'm so excited that you're here. You have such a fascinating story of how you got familiar with what is going on in the area of human trafficking, and then to be able to plug in and take the helm at Rahab. It's fascinating. Tell us your background. Where did you come from?
Well, it's a long story, but the last 10 years, I was an FBI agent working in the Canton office of the FBI. I coordinated the child exploitation task force out of our office, and I primarily focused on human trafficking under the Crimes Against Children program, and then also adults under the Civil Rights program.
Was that something that you grew into, or you were hired for that purpose? I can't imagine that this has been a problem for this long, that we actually have people where that's their job description.
Well, I will tell you, like many, when I became an FBI agent, I wasn't aware of the problem of human trafficking. Rahab was. Rahab began 16 years ago.
Wow.
Before anyone, I think, even recognized that term, human trafficking. But it's something I came to learn after becoming an FBI agent and beginning to address crimes against children. And I'll tell you, I would say initially when I started to see it, I probably didn't recognize it as human trafficking, but you had folks who were arranging to meet children crossing state lines. And so certainly that was a federal criminal violation under other statutes and was prosecuted under other statutes. But as I began to see the things I had opportunity to see and to learn more, I recognized that human trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking, are really prolific in our area. And so that became pretty quickly my area of focus for the bulk of my time for those 10 years in 10 Ohio counties.
I guess the first question that pops into my mind is why? Why is it so prolific here? What is it about here that makes it a place where human trafficking takes place?
Well, it's prolific everywhere. And I would say evil, that there is evil everywhere. And as I've read my Bible from cover to cover, I've recognized that God's story is the story of setting people free. The enemy works to deceive and to enslave, and human trafficking at its core is slavery. I had a forced labor case, so textbook slavery case that hit the headlines and folks were shocked. But the reality of that case was it was no different than any of these sex trafficking cases. The stuff that people view as prostitution, the tactics are the same. The evil, evil's weapon is deception. We know that as believers. We've read that in the Bible. I saw that as an FBI agent investigating cases, that is evil's weapon. That's traffickers' weapon. They work to deceive their victims and manipulate their victims. And then also to be deceitful to the community so that what they're doing is hidden, because they obviously couldn't do what they were doing if it was in plain view and folks recognized it for what it was.
Yes. How do we protect our children? What tactics? Let us be as wise as serpents while being as innocent as doves. What tactics do these people use to deceive children, for one thing?
There's a variety of different things. Social media has opened up a whole new area where when your whole life is out there online and when we're putting our vulnerabilities out there online, traffickers are watching for that. They're combing the internet. They're looking at the social media sites and using the apps and using that to find kids who are vulnerable. So the number one thing is just to strike a balance with your kids on social media. And we're to the point where I used to try to tell people just stay off the internet, but that's clearly not practical, right?
Yeah.
So, but really strike a balance and be careful and watch what your kids are doing online. Educate them, educate yourself, and just know that that is a vulnerability. People can pretend to be anyone they want to be on the internet. It's like Halloween, right? You can dress up and pretend to be anyone.
Wow.
And so that's something that traffickers will do a lot, is pretend to be a kid when they're not a kid, or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that's not who they are. So I always say if you're interacting with somebody online, make sure it's someone you know in real life.
It's okay, isn't it, to say to somebody who's trying to friend you on Facebook, let's say, I'm sorry, how do I know you? Please remind me how I know you. You're not being rude. You're just being smart, correct?
Absolutely. And for kids, it's okay to let parents be the bad guy and say, my mom is watching my accounts and I'm, not allowed to friend people or to ignore it. The world's not going to end. To ignore those folks. Now, in real life, too, traffickers will approach folks. It's not usually, if you're familiar with the movie Taken, I think people have some ideas in their head from that. I won't say that it never happens in that way, but it's usually more subtle, similar tactics where a trafficker will pretend to be a friend or to be somebody who has a romantic interest, and then it'll evolve or devolve into something else over time.
Are there places that are especially dangerous? Truck stops, malls? What might be a place where we want to make sure that we're just not alone? Or that our children are not alone?
So I would say there's safety in numbers.
Yes.
Anywhere, right? But those places that you've mentioned in particular, anywhere where kids tend to congregate is somewhere where a trafficker is going to go as well. So again, just to be cognizant of that and to be kind to people, but don't go off with a stranger. Don't go anywhere when nobody knows where you're going or whom you're going with. That applies to adults as well as to kids.
One thing that comes to mind, and I want to say this right, but I'll apologize right now. I'm going to offend somebody. Let's talk about the immigration situation, because we're seeing all these little children coming, and our hearts were broken as we saw children separated from their parents. But then I hear those aren't always parents. So yes, you want to see families reunited, but we certainly do not want to reunite children with someone who's bringing them across the borders to traffic them. Your thoughts on that? How do we address that?
Well, that would definitely take longer than half an hour. It's a complicated question, and I will tell you, our friends down in Tuscarawas County, the Human Trafficking Task Force down there, is trying to work through this in particular because even before this hit the headlines, there was a real concern there for the unaccompanied juveniles who were being placed down there in Tusc County, and so the community came together, different areas of the community, recognizing that we have kids here who potentially are vulnerable and wanting to be vigilant and to be good neighbors and to make sure that there aren't any invisible folks among us. That's one of the big things that the community can do, no matter what type of trafficking we're talking about. That's why Rahab, if you're familiar with the ministry, tries to go all of the places where trafficked women or children may be, the streets, the strip clubs, the prisons, and then offering places for them to come to us. Because in a culture like we live in today, where folks are connected by social media, or there's the crowds, but you can get lost in a crowd, and we don't want anybody to be getting lost. We want to be forming relationships with the vulnerable and ensuring that there is somebody in each person's life who can be that safe person that can speak the truth of their value, and then also just be a link to help and to hope.
How do we recognize a vulnerable person? What are some of those vulnerabilities? And then help me understand how Rahab works to address that.
Well, I would say that we're all vulnerable to different degrees, some more vulnerable than others. We see really frequently with trafficked women and children that more often or not there was a past of sexual abuse. There is just an absence of that support person in their life, and those are the vulnerabilities that traffickers come in and prey on. And we strive to share the love of Christ. Christ came and he formed relationships. He wants to have a relationship with us. So as hopeless as these situations may be, as broken as these women and children may be, we want to share that hope. We don't require anyone to believe as we do to receive our services, but love and truth came in the flesh and walked this earth. And so now we strive to let that love and truth live through us by going the places that Jesus went.
One thing that's so tricky when we're talking about victims of trafficking, they've often been treated as the criminal because they're doing something that is illegal. You have a unique perspective, having been an FBI agent and now in ministry of Rahab, to be able to encourage someone to come forward and understand, we understand you are a victim.
Right.
That, how do you get that across to someone?
Well, that's part of the deception. When we talk about the deception that evil uses, the traffickers use, they want to portray the victim as you're the bad one, I'm the good one, I'm the helper. And so we just have to peel back those layers. And you hear so much about truth these days and who's telling the truth and who's not. But ultimately, the answer to human trafficking, whether it be in the justice system or through our ministry, the answer is love and truth. When I was an FBI agent, my job was to uncover the truth, the untainted facts, so that those could be presented in a court of law, and hopefully a jury would ultimately have the opportunity to make a decision. For those facts to be uncovered, we needed to treat victims and witnesses, anybody that we interacted with, we needed to treat them with compassion, or what we would call loving your neighbor, right? And so with the ministry, we strive to show that love and truth. And it can take time before a survivor of human trafficking is ready to disclose their story and what happened. In fact, we shouldn't expect them to recognize from the start that, oh, I'm a victim of human trafficking, I'm a survivor of human trafficking. We just need to start building those relationships, and we'll recognize the red flags and recognize that somebody probably has been trafficked, and ultimately that story will come through. But our primary objective is not to get someone to disclose that they're a trafficking survivor. It's to show the love of Christ, to give them safe places. And when they have that security, when their trauma is being addressed, when they're in that safe place and stable, then they'll get to a point where they can perhaps tell that story. And that's one of the reasons that cases you don't see prosecuted in the volume that they're really taking place around us, is because folks are getting snatched back up in traffickers' nets. But if they're in safe places, if they have a network like what Rahab has to offer rather than a trafficker's network, then I believe that ultimately you will see more of those types of results.
It's an interesting ministry. It's not one where you sit in your office and wait for people to come to you. They, as you say, people do not stop in and say, hello, I'm being trafficked. Can you help me? You really have to be out and around and looking for those red flags and establishing relationships and building relationships with people who look as though they are vulnerable. What are some of those red flags, Suzanne? And are there things the rest of us can do to help your ministry?
Absolutely. So you can be part of the ministry in several ways. The red flags in particular with kids, I would watch for that older boyfriend. I would watch for suddenly having money and not having a great explanation for where it came from, or again, that coming from the older boyfriend. I would watch for, with children or adults, never being alone, seeking medical care maybe, but there's always a helper nearby. Watch maybe that criminal record. When folks are routinely getting arrested for something, no matter what the offense is, there are times that there are other factors in play. Many of our community partners here in Stark County, in Tusk County, Summit County, a lot of the surrounding counties now, different entities, whether it be the court or children's services, a lot of the service providers have screening tools that they're using to identify those who are trafficked or who are at risk. Because somebody's not going to say to you, probably, they may, but it's not real likely, they're going to say, I'm a victim of trafficking. But you can ask if they've been in a situation where somebody has hurt them. You can see the physical marks. You can see if it's somebody you've known over time, that you've had the opportunity to watch over time. You can maybe see a decline or a change in the demeanor that would be an indicator, a new presence in their life that maybe has accompanied that change. If you're privy to their social media accounts, there may be signs on there.
Yes. We're speaking with Suzanne Lewis Johnson. She's the new executive director at Rahab. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community. So good. This is so important. You're doing an awesome job, by the way. Okay.
I feel like you asked some questions, and then I did like with my kids, I answered a different question. So if you want to come back
That's
to anything.
what you're supposed to do. Turn it into the one you want to answer. I can tell you have a PR background.
There were a couple, though, I don't remember what they were now, that I wanted to answer. And I'm like, what was it? I never got back to it.
What the deception was, how to recognize, how does Rahab work? I think we're going to go back to that one.
Okay.
What are the red flags? I want to talk more about the forced labor part of it.
What the community can do.
Yes, yes. Okay, so 14 is 13 and a half. 15 is 12 and a half. 15 and a half is 12. We have 12 minutes to go. Okay. Do you need anything? A refill?
I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to give them a flat line.